Heyo, I'm Orinem. Over the past few months, I've been thinking a lot about one game in particular, Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky. It's a game that I spent a lot of my childhood playing and replaying over and over, and it's a game that was really formative for me, shaping a lot of what I enjoy in other games I play over the years. It's a game that I like to replay every once in a while, even if I know every story beat, every dungeon, every twist and turn and line of dialogue almost by heart. And most importantly, it's my favorite game of all time. There's just something about it that got me super hooked way back when I first played it as a kid and keeps me thinking about it today. A scrappy, pre-industrial setting? Love it. A heartfelt, intimate story? Yes, please. Playing as a Pokemon? Oh my god, sign me up. So that's why even with this mouthful of a title, I always recommend playing PMD Sky whenever it comes up in conversation, even if I'm usually the one to bring it up. In my recent bout of PMD brain rot, though, I started actually thinking, is this game something I should be recommending? After all, the original titles, Explorers of Time and Darkness, are almost 20 years old at this point. A lot has changed for video games as an art form in that time. They're much more accessible, both to make and to play. There's newer conventions that players have come to expect, like genre tropes, quality of life features, and fair difficulty. And not to mention that games as a whole are more artistically expressive and technically impressive than they've ever been. So with all of that in mind, how does PMD Sky feel for a new player today? A modern player? Does it feel good but slightly antiquated, or is it borderline unplayable? Is it a game worth anyone's time, or is it a game that should be shelved in the archives of games past? Is my favorite game actually good? I do realize how difficult it'll be for me specifically to answer this, because I'm maybe the farthest from an objective critic. I can barely see through my bright pink nostalgia goggles sometimes. But at the same time, I feel like I can't properly appreciate it, much like any piece of art, without acknowledging its faults. So for this video, I want to give this a try as an exercise in fair criticism. I want to see if I'm able to hold back my fondness for this game, at least for a little bit. And I want to adopt the eyes of a complete stranger to it, and see whether PMD Sky is a game that I think anyone should experience at least once. With that goal in mind, I'm gonna try to limit spoilers as much as possible, and I'll only use footage from the first few chapters of the game. Might not be necessary, but if this video does find someone who hasn't played PMD Sky before, then I don't want to ruin the fun for them, because I think there's a lot to gain by playing this game blind, at least for the story. So I'll be keeping a majority of this video spoiler-free. Alright, ready? Here we go. A game's art style is the very first thing that someone takes in when watching a trailer or booting up the title screen for the first time. And so to some degree, it can determine whether the game is actually played or not. This is especially true nowadays, where making and playing games is more accessible than it's ever been, so there's even more incentive to grab the eye, to stand out. Now that's not to say that art style is the end-all be-all. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I do mean is that the initial look and feel serves as the bedrock upon which the player's entire relationship with the game is built. It's the first impression, and it also acts as the glue throughout the entire journey, an anchor of familiarity and identity, even when the story or environment or the gameplay strays very, very far from the start. Now, how is PMD Sky's art style? It's visual bedrock. Well, for one, it's a Pokémon game. That fact alone is a good enough aesthetic anchor for a lot of folks. Pokémon, as a brand, is its own visual identity. So these critters that many of us know and love can be applied to a wide variety of genres without much friction, as we're seeing more and more nowadays. Is this overdone? Maybe. Is this appropriate for PMD Sky? I actually think so. The world of this game is reminiscent of an age long forgotten, a time after fire, but before metallurgy, where life feels closer to nature than our modern world allows. Chunsoft could have gone with something more like Zootopia, where it's the modern world, just without humans. They really could have, but they didn't. And as a result, the game feels adjacent to untamed wilderness. Plants grow everywhere. Buildings are integrated with the environment. And there's an ever-present feeling that the world, the natural world, is beautiful despite the danger. This setting, highlighting both the beauty and the danger of the natural world, is incredibly fitting for a world inhabited by Pokémon alone, I think. Also, the art direction itself is in support of this. Many of the environments are very painterly, and bright, and colorful, and welcoming. There are bespoke illustrations and animations used for certain lines of dialogue or cutscenes, showing lots of visual detail, all with lots of color and character. However, that specific artistry is not extended to the Pokemon themselves. If the environments feel like illustrations, then the Pokemon feel much more like sprites. Their colors are flatter, and there are black outlines separating them from the background. As a result, the inhabitants of this world are visually distinct from it, disjointed even. And this can be a little awkward at times, especially in cutscenes where a character is interacting with a part of the environment. It feels almost like all of these Pokemon were just dropped in, not true inhabitants, merely visitors. Which feels weird since the setting itself seems like it was genuinely created around them. At the same time though, this disjointedness is actually in support of the gameplay. It leads to more visual clarity, having all the characters you can interact with drawn in a distinct style from the environment. And also, this disjointedness likely comes from a technical limitation, or maybe a time constraint. Every single species of Pokemon, over 400 of them, has unique animations for idling, walking, herding, attacking, and charging. And there's a dozen other variations of those as well. In addition, every single Pokemon can be viewed from 5 total angles, with some of them being mirrored. So each one of those animations had to be drawn 5 different times, meaning that's at least 25 different unique sprites and animations for every single Pokemon. And that's not even mentioning the portraits. That's a monumental amount of work, and it's insanely impressive to me. And I am really glad that this amount of care was put in to make all of the Pokemon seem so lively, because it really does help all of the critters of this world feel alive to me. And so from that perspective, I'm okay with the simplified style of the sprites. It's a trade-off, giving up painterly realism for clarity and movement, which is a good decision, I think. Overall, I feel that the art direction of PMD Sky holds its own. The illustrative nature of the backgrounds means that the game as a whole feels like it was made with love and care, with the hardware itself being the limitation. As a result, the visuals have aged pretty well in my eyes. In the style of the Pokemon sprites, while simple by comparison, are not unknown to a modern eye. Many modern games go with a retro style for their sprites, so because of the care that's put into its visuals way back when, I feel that the art direction should feel familiar and comfortable for a modern player, maybe even welcomed. But art direction itself isn't the only thing that drives the mood of a game. There's another aspect that can leave just as much of a mark, if not more. If you're an astute listener, you may have noticed that I use the music from PMD Sky in almost every video I've put out so far. The main reason is that it's my favorite game and I really like its music, but I also find that a lot of the tracks are really good at establishing a pace. A good chunk of my favorite tracks from this game come from the mystery dungeons themselves. I'll talk more about the gameplay soon, but for now, all you have to know is that it's a turn-based mix of exploration and combat, where you could stumble upon danger at any moment. So because of this unique blend of high and low action, the music needs to be able to encapsulate a mood that can fit both. And so, I find that a lot of the dungeon music focuses on 2 things. First is setting a pace akin to a brisk walk. Not sprinting, but not strolling either. You need to move with intentionality while in a dungeon, but you shouldn't dawdle. You need to get through the dungeon before your time and resources run out, but you need to be careful not to get caught off guard. So I find that the music reflects this by always having some forward, consistent movement going on, something to keep the car moving without stalling or blowing the engine. Usually, this comes in the form of counter melodies or percussion, I think. Strings or synths quickly arpeggiating, maracas or hi-hats tapping at a consistent pace, something always going forward, even when the melodies are slow and floaty. Second, the music works to convey a dungeon's mood. This is especially important since the core of the gameplay itself is the same between each dungeon. And that means that even if the dungeon looks different, the looks themselves can only go so far, meaning the music takes the reins on driving the mood a lot of the time. Now, how effective is this? Well, that's really hard for me to say. I know that I really like the dungeon music, and I find it really effective, but maybe that's because I grew up with it. After all, it's been something I've enjoyed for as long as I can remember. Luckily, I think there's a way I can get around my nostalgia, and that's by checking out a similar game's music that I just don't have nostalgia for, namely Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Red and Blue Rescue Team. Despite being a massive fan of their sequels, I never played PMD Rescue Team as a kid. I first played it in college after buying Blue Rescue Team on eBay, and while it felt similar enough, it was more for studying, to see where my favorite game gets its roots. And so, I don't have that nostalgia factor nearly as much. So, how good is PMD Rescue Team's music at setting a mood? Honestly, I think it's pretty decent. It's a bit in your face at times with the quirkiness, but there's a nice thread of mystery and unease that runs through a lot of the tracks. And at a more granular level, the instrumentation and energy of each track reflects its respective dungeon pretty nicely, I think. Frosty Grotto feels looming and icy. Sky Tower feels hopeful and climactic. and Thunderwave Cave feels groovy and synthy. It all works pretty well to give each dungeon its own feeling, its own identity. And so I think that I can safely extrapolate and affirm that the music of PMD Sky does this pretty effectively as well. I will say though, the quality of the instruments in PMD Rescue Team have not aged well. Some of them can feel pretty grating to my ears at least, and the balancing between them is a bit odd at times. I think this comes from a hardware limitation that is more of an issue with the Game Boy and less of an issue for the DS though. So thankfully, it's not that much of an issue for PMD Sky. While a lot of the iconic sounds stuck around in between Rescue Team and Sky, many others got an upgrade with the improved hardware, meaning the harshness of Rescue Team's instruments and balancing had mostly been smoothed over. That's not to say it doesn't sound like a DS game though. On the contrary, it absolutely has that now retro sound. But I think that the fact that the audio itself is balanced well enough, the melodies and the harmonies are engaging, and the energy is appropriate means that the music as a whole is effective. If you want a more thorough analysis of the melodies and leitmotifs of PMD Sky themselves, I highly recommend 8-Bit Music Theory's video about it. There really is a lot of care and intentionality put into crafting the story of the game through its various melodies outside of the mystery dungeons. So from that perspective, the music is a huge success. Before we move on to the real meat and potatoes of this game, I want to ask if you're enjoying the critique so far. And if you are, then it would mean a ton if you considered subscribing. A lot of my other videos do this sort of thing as well, discussing and analyzing lots of other games, and if you change your mind, no hard feelings about it. Anyways, let's get back to it. Pokémon Mystery Dungeon as a series is pretty interesting when it comes to the gameplay, I think. It's a nice blend of RPGs and roguelikes, where the progression is based on leveling up your character and partner and other party members to a degree. And you do this leveling or progressing within randomly generated dungeons in a roguelike fashion. In fact, the roguelike elements are shockingly similar to the game from where the genre gets its name, Rogue. It's turn-based, room and corridor dungeon crawling. It makes sense then that the earlier Mystery Dungeon games are sort of infamous for being brutal and unforgiving at times. If you aren't being super careful, or don't know a dungeon well enough, or are just plain unlucky, it's really easy to wipe and be kicked out of the dungeon. Similarly, some of the AI for your party members is pretty bad. Too often, they will attack as much as they're able, using completely random moves, waking up sleeping enemy Pokemon, and refusing to run away with you. And since your mission's success is tied to your partner Pokemon being just as conscious as yourself, this can lead to some frustration. Now, the later entries in the series do fix a lot of these character AI problems. Your party members use super effective moves when able, and they get lost less easily, but sadly, that quality of life does not apply to PMD Sky. So the only way to backport that level of intelligence is to essentially micromanage your party members turn by turn, toggling certain moves or switching tactics on the fly. It's tedious and not fun. So over time, I personally just learned to deal with the basic tactics and adjust my playstyle accordingly. It's far from ideal though, so I feel that to a modern player, the character AI would be a source of a lot of frustration. At the same time, I do think that the dungeon exploration, at its core, is really fun. It's exhilarating to explore a dangerous cave or forest, and it's satisfying to see how few resources I can use to get through it. Seeing how deep into the dungeon I can go without touching an apple or an orangeberry. And it's really satisfying to go through a hall after clearing a dungeon, especially after you get past the early game. Your home base in Treasure Town slowly accumulating more money, more consumables, and more rare items. When it works, it's a very fulfilling gameplay loop. I also think the fact that this is a Pokemon game plays really well with the genres. Much like any RPG, you and your party members all have strengths and weaknesses, and in this case, it's provided through the type chart and by your own species movesets. Unlike other Pokemon games though, the stats themselves, attack, defense, etc., don't matter nearly as much. Instead, it's closer to a game of species chess, how you position your character and your party members against the enemy Pokemon to make sure you hit hard and fast, avoiding the hard hits in return. Status effects are much different in Mystery Dungeon as well. The quote-unquote meta of PMD Sky, if there is one, is to use powerful status effects as much as possible. And when I say powerful, some of them can get really powerful. For instance, raising a Pokemon's speed means it gets extra turns. In other words, extra movement, extra item uses, and extra attacks. Similarly, multi-hit moves like Fury Attack and Pin Missile are extraordinarily powerful. Remember how stats matter less than a Pokemon's type? Well, that applies to each hit of these multi-hit moves as well. So essentially, you get to use 2 to 5 attacks for the price of 1. All of that to say, the game takes the concept of Pokemon, creatures with their own types and movesets, and spins it in a completely different direction. The balancing is all out of whack, sure, but the change in pace compared to the mainline Pokemon games is a welcome one. It's fresh, it's fast, it's high stakes, and it's honestly very immersive, I think. Great for a game where you get to play as the Pokemon themselves. Now, there's one more topic I want to cover, and if you're a fan of the series, then you probably already know what it is. If you like Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, you've been waiting for this. The stories of these games are the reason to play them, I think. And as far as I've been able to tell, PMD Sky is regarded as the best in terms of its story. It's certainly my favorite. The plot is interesting, the core characters feel genuine, and the emotions. My god, there's so many feels in this game, and I love it so much. There's a reason one of the songs at the end makes me tear up every time I hear it. But having said that, simply telling a good story doesn't necessarily mean it's well written. Despite the game using plenty of portraits and a plethora of animations just for showing emotions, the writing doesn't employ a lot of show don't tell. In fact, it's more than happy to tell you, spouting plenty of lines to be extra clear what a character thinks or what they mean. And in the same vein, there are flashbacks to previous scenes and lines of dialogue almost to an obsessive degree. I think at least once, there's a time where a thing happens, and in the very next scene, there's a flashback to that very thing that just happened. Like, game, it just happened. I don't need to see it again. I do recognize that the target audience is kids here though. I really get that. But kids are smarter than we give them credit for a lot of the time. And I feel that PMD Sky could have trusted that its audience would remember the details or pick up on things more than it assumes they do. Even if a player forgets a minor detail, that's okay too. That's part of storytelling. Sometimes you forget things or miss details, and that's completely normal. A good story can still stand on its own despite some missing details. Now, I want to give credit where it's due, because PMD Sky does tell a compelling story without pulling its punches in terms of its content. While I think words like die and kill are absent from the script, that doesn't mean that these concepts are avoided. There are lots of threats and sources of danger, both immediate and existential. There are also plenty of instances where a character's life or well-being is clearly at risk, and a handful of times where they're seriously injured. So from that perspective, I think it's commendable that this kind of story was able to be told to a younger audience. Because kids do need to be exposed to these tougher concepts, to some degree, I think. The stomach-churning gloom caused by fear and dread, the hot and fiery anger that comes from betrayal and injustice. These concepts are important to know about, and learning how one processes them is equally important, because everyone comes across them eventually. So kids media in general, I think, can serve as a soft introduction to these difficult emotions. Telling stories that induce those same feelings that allows a kid to explore them and how they're affected by them in a safe environment. All of that to say, while PMD Sky's writing can be awkward at times, and I personally would love to see it rewritten with a modern team of writers, I have to commend it and feel thankful for being exposed to such a rich, emotional story as a kid. It was important to me then to feel those intense emotions, and it's important to me now to remember feeling them. And so, we're back to our central question. Do I recommend anyone today play Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky? I think, yeah, I do. I do recommend it. A lot of the disparate parts have not aged well. The DS-era musical instruments, the antiquated combat system, the clunky dialogue, and when compared to the genuinely impressive artistry of games today, they may not hold up. But I do think that when put together, PMD Sky holds its own in creating an immersive world that is lively and beautiful, and a world that feels like it moves around you and with you. And this world is used to tell a meaningful story of identity, betrayal, companionship, and saving the world. And so, of course, I recommend this game, my favorite game, to anyone who might enjoy living in this bright, beautiful world for just a little while and become a part of this tale that touched me and so many other kids so long ago. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope I did okay with this critique and with the concept of analyzing something I really enjoy and trying to practice compartmentalizing some of my positive feelings and try to think about some of the things I would change otherwise, just as a thought exercise. And I hope you enjoyed it. Also, since this was the longest script I've written so far, I did have to cut some things. And so if you're interested, I'll be posting some of them to my Patreon. Mainly, I wanted to talk about whether this game worked as a satisfying Pokemon game, but that felt a little too different from the goal of this video, and so I felt I should post it somewhere else as a bonus thing. Anyways, thanks again so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.